The gloves were cream kid leather, double-seamed at the wrist, and they were the finest things Marin Ashby owned. She had not bought them. They had been pressed upon her that morning by her mother, with the specific tenderness her mother reserved for objects rather than daughters, and the instruction that accompanied them had been delivered with equal care. She was not to remove them for any reason, before any person, at any hour of the gathering, and if anyone asked, she had burned herself on a candle, and it had been quite minor, and she had already forgotten about it. She had not forgotten about it. She did not think, standing in the entrance hall of Caldwell House, with 43 other people all wearing their finest and none of them gloves, that she would forget about it for the remainder of her life. The story of how Marin Ashby came to stand in that hall with hidden hands is a longer story than her family would prefer to be told. But it is the true one. And the truth of it, she would come to understand this only much later, though I will tell you now, began not with her hands at all, but with a ledger. A household ledger, kept for 5 years in a fair, careful hand she did not recognize, that was already burning in a grate 3 counties away at the precise moment she stepped through the Caldwell doors. She did not know the ledger existed. She did not know that its burning had been arranged, and she did not know that the man across the hall, who had just looked up from a conversation he had clearly been tolerating rather than conducting, was the one who had paid for it to be kept. She knew none of this. Had she known, she would have removed the gloves herself. But we are not yet at that part of the story. Marin was 26, the elder of 2 daughters, and the plainer, which her family had impressed upon her regularly enough that she had stopped waiting to disagree. What she was, in fact, was observant, the kind of observant that comes from years of being the one nobody crossed a room for, which leaves you considerable freedom to watch who crosses the room for whom, and why, and what it costs them. She had been companion to Lady Ashby, her own mother, in the way that poor relations are companions, present at every gathering, accounted for in no one's plans, kept neat and quiet and useful and apart from the actual business of the family, which was the marrying off of her younger sister Cecily, who was beautiful the way Adette is beautiful, which is to say that people looked at her and thought immediately of what she was worth to them. Cecily was to be betrothed this evening to Lord Ashby's choice of the last 3 months. Marin had been told at breakfast who it was. The Duke of Vernmoor. She had not heard of him before, which told her something. He was not a man who required society's attention, which was either because he had so much he had grown tired of it, or because he was the sort of person who found attention wasteful. She had filed this and moved on to buttering her toast. He had been pointed out to her in the hall's opening movement, the tall man standing slightly apart from the main cluster near the fire, speaking with the family's solicitor in the practiced way of someone who would rather be reviewing the document than discussing it. He was broad-shouldered and dark-coated, and he held his glass without drinking from it, which Marin noted as the mark of a man who intended to keep his wits at a gathering designed to make wits expensive. He was, objectively, the most formidable-looking person in the room, and the stillness of him, the quality of a man who knows he will not need to move first, was either authority or grief, and Marin had not yet been close enough to know which. The deadline was the end of the evening. Her mother had made this clear. By the time the last carriage was called, the terms would be signed, and Cecily would be betrothed to the Duke of Vernmoor, and the Ashby family's question of the last 6 years, the question of money, specifically its dramatic and largely unexplained absence, would be answered. All Marin needed to do was nothing. Stand beside her mother, answer pleasantly if spoken to, do not remove the gloves, and let the evening proceed. She was good at doing nothing. She had a great deal of experience. And so she stood, and she watched, and she noticed in the first quarter of an hour 3 things: that the Duke had not yet looked at Cecily, that Lord Ashby, her father, was drinking quickly and smiling at everyone he did not need to impress, and that the family's man of business, Mr. Holt, a smooth, soft-voiced man, who had been managing the Ashby accounts for 4 years and who wore his immaculateness the way a wall wears paint, had placed himself exactly halfway between the Duke and the door, with the gentle, patient orientation of a man who is waiting for something to happen that he has already arranged. She was placed at dinner 4 seats from him and across the table, which was far enough for observation and close enough for the occasional remark. If remarks were the sort of thing that happened, they were not for the first 2 courses. The Duke spoke with his neighbor, a baronet's wife, who asked him the same question twice without noticing, and Marin ate her soup and studied Mr. Holt, who sat 2 places to the Duke's right and had the attentive, controlled stillness of a man listening to a conversation he could not quite hear. "You have been watching Holt for 20 minutes. I have been watching the table. Mr. Holt occupies a portion of it. He occupies the portion you have returned to most frequently. May I ask why? You may ask. I haven't decided yet whether to answer." The baronet's wife, who had been in the middle of her 3rd sentence about the difficulty of finding good lace, lost the thread entirely. Across the table, Cecily looked between them with the bright, shallow attention of someone watching a game she did not quite understand. Lord Ashby, further down, lifted his glass. "You are the elder daughter. I am. And you will be my father's son-in-law after this evening. That remains to be settled." This was not the expected answer. She did not let her expression report it, but she filed it carefully beside the observation about Mr. Holt, and between those 2 things she felt the quiet opening of a question she did not yet have the words for, a ledger that had been handed to her with the first column already filled. The evening moved toward its conclusion the way evenings of this kind move, with the appearance of leisure over a structure of rigid precision. After dinner, the company gathered in the music room, where Cecily was displayed to advantage at the pianoforte and played admirably, and Marin stood at the window and watched the drive and thought about ledgers, about how the Ashby money had gone, about how her father had explained it, variously over the years, bad harvests, bad investments, bad counsel, how each explanation had the feel of a prepared answer rather than a remembered one, how Mr. Holt had arrived the year after the first explanation and had been trusted completely with everything that remained. "Your hands." She did not turn for a moment because she had recognized the voice and was deciding what her face should be doing. She turned. The Duke was beside her at the window, looking not at her but at the drive below, as if he had come to look at the drive and she happened to be there. "My hands. You are wearing gloves indoors. In July. Everyone else is not. If I have offended in noticing, I will go away. You have not offended. My mother prefers me to wear them. Does your mother's preference account for the way you keep the left hand from resting on anything?" He said it without inflection, without accusation, a man reading a column of figures aloud and waiting for the sum. The room behind them had moved into a different piece. Cecily had yielded the bench to a neighbor's daughter and was now standing with the family solicitor, laughing at something. Mr. Holt was not in the room. Marin had noted his absence 2 minutes ago. The gloves contain a reason I was asked not to share. Were you asked or told? Is there a difference in this family? He was quiet for a moment. The music moved through its middle section. I am going to say something that I will need you to hear as plainly as it is meant, not as the kind of thing men say to women in window recesses at gatherings of this sort. He waited. Go on. Something in this house is wrong. I have been trying to determine what for 6 weeks. I do not think it is your sister. I do not think it is your father. He stopped. The line of his jaw was very still. I think it began before I was invited here, and I think it was arranged to end with my signature on a document that would disadvantage people who do not know they are being disadvantaged. Marin was quiet. The fire across the room clicked and settled. She could feel the seams of the gloves at her wrists, the places where the leather folded over itself. What made you say that to me? Because you have been watching Holt all evening the way I watch him, and because whatever you are hiding in those gloves has made you very careful not to be angry about it. In my experience, that particular kind of care is the most dangerous thing in any room. She looked at the window. The drive below was empty, the torches burning orange and still. In the music room, 40 people continued their evening. I will tell you what is in the gloves, if you will tell me what you mean by disadvantaged people. He looked at her for a long moment, the look of a man making a decision he had perhaps been making for some time. There is a thing that I cannot yet lay before you. There are parts of it I am still assembling, but I can tell you that your family's money did not go to bad harvests. He paused. And I can tell you, it did not go to investments. The music stopped. The room applauded. Marin turned to face him fully for the first time that evening, and she said, very quietly, "Then we have things to discuss." They were given no further opportunity that night. Lord Ashby's solicitor materialized with the timing of a man who had been watching. The papers were produced, and the Duke was drawn away into the library with the practiced smoothness of a conclusion being stage-managed. Marin watched him go. Mr. Holt reappeared in the doorway behind her and stood there a moment with the expression of a man reviewing his own arithmetic and finding it satisfactory. Then he looked at her. She smiled at him pleasantly. He smiled back. She spent the carriage ride home with her hands folded in her lap and her sister asleep against her shoulder, thinking about the particular quality of a silence that comes after someone has told you the truth. She had heard a great deal of comfortable lying in her life. She had a gift for the difference. Her father was not in the carriage. He had stayed behind. She did not ask why. 3 days passed before she saw the Duke again. And in those 3 days, she learned 2 things by watching: that her father had come home after midnight on the night of the gathering and had gone directly to the study where the household papers were kept, and that Mr. Holt had called the following afternoon for a meeting that lasted 4 hours, after which her father had emerged looking considerably more settled than he had any right to be. Marin had served them tea. She poured with the automatic competence of long practice, and she read Mr. Holt's hands while she did it, because his face gave nothing away but his hands were less disciplined. He had folded and refolded the same document twice, which was the gesture of a man who had rehearsed what he had to say so many times that the object associated with it had acquired a nervous habit of its own. She had done the household accounts for 3 years, since her father's attention had proved unreliable. She knew what a set of books looked like when they were honest, and she knew what they looked like when they had been tidied, and she knew, specifically, that there is a particular pattern of tidy in books that have been tidied by someone with Mr. Holt's particular method of tidying, which leaves the columns balanced and the progression logical, and one tiny category of expenditure that never varies, not even in the seasons when everything else does. She had noticed this pattern 18 months ago. She had not yet known what to do with it. The Duke called on the morning of the 4th day. She was told, after the fact, that he had come to discuss settlement details with her father. She heard this from the housemaid, who was young and paid more attention to boots than to conversations, and who mentioned that the gentleman had asked, very particularly, whether Miss Ashby might show him the garden, as he had heard the roses were notable. Marin had no idea whether the roses were notable. She had been managing the household, not the grounds. She met him in the entrance hall while her mother was still composing a reason to chaperone them, and they went into the garden, and he said without preliminary, "I need to know when the current household accounts were last audited by someone outside this house." "Never, to my knowledge." "Mr. Holt has managed them alone since he arrived." "Since he arrived." He considered this. They walked past a bed of something in good condition that she could not have named, and before that, who kept them? "My father tried. He is not a methodical man." She paused, and before that, they were kept by my mother's uncle, who taught me what I know about household mathematics before he died. He was very methodical. The Duke looked at her. "What do you know about household mathematics?" "Enough to know that 4 years of Mr. Holt's accounts have never once shown a deficit in the staff account, even in November and March, which is when staff accounts always show deficits, because those are the months when the coal merchant and the draper come to be paid." She stopped walking. "And I know that there is a quarterly disbursement to an entity called Rowe and Sons that does not correspond to any supplier, tradesman, or creditor I have ever been able to identify, despite a year and a half of looking." He was very still for a moment, the stillness she was beginning to read not as coldness, but as the thing that happened when he was receiving information he had needed for a specific time. Rowe and Sons is not a firm. It is a single account at a private bank in the city, established 6 years ago. He paused. "I found this 2 weeks before I accepted your father's invitation. I did not know whose household I was walking into. The silence between them was occupied by a bird, somewhere to the left, working industriously through what appeared to be a very satisfying aria." "How did you know to look?" "Because the account was established by a man who once managed my estates, who left my service under circumstances that I was, at the time, too absorbed in other matters to investigate properly. I have had 4 years of leisure to regret that." He stopped. "My wife had died. I was not attending to the right things." She did not say she was sorry, because he had not said it as a grief in need of consolation. He had said it as a fact he had made his peace with. Imperfectly, and was including in the accounting because it was accurate. So he came here. He looked back toward the house, and whatever arrangement he has established, it has been in operation long enough that dismantling it quietly would require your family's assistance, and knowledge they do not yet have, and a great deal more documentation than I currently possess." "What do you currently possess?" He looked at her, and what she saw in his face was not calculation, but something very close to a man who had been carrying something heavy alone for a long time and was trying to determine whether the person beside him was built for weight. She held his gaze without performing either patience or eagerness. She simply waited, the way she was good at waiting, still and level and entirely there. "I have a copy of the original ledger, the one that shows what was taken and from whom." He paused. "Holt does not know the copy exists." The bird finished its aria. Somewhere in the garden, a door opened and closed, and Marin heard her mother's voice inquiring whether they wanted tea. "How long do we have?" "The settlement papers require signatures within a fortnight, and Holt will have reviewed them by now. He will know what I know, or suspect it. He has never left a loose end standing for long. You should accept the tea." "My mother worries about men who decline refreshment. It makes her focus." And she heard, behind her, very quietly, and for what the expression on his face when she turned to check suggested might have been the first time in a long while, a single low sound, more exhale than laugh, but unmistakably the cousin of one. She filed it, carefully, with everything else. The fortnight was the clock, and it ran fast. She had known abstractly what it was to work against time. She had not known, specifically, what it was to do so, while also conducting a systematic review of 5 years of fraudulent household accounts across a dining table every evening from 7:30 until her candle burned low. With the particular company of a man who asked precise questions and wrote small, and never once suggested she was wrong when she was right. He had come with the accounts on the 5th evening, with the copy of the original ledger wrapped in oilcloth, and he had spread them on the table beside hers, and they had worked. Her mother had expressed initial concern about the arrangement. Her father had said nothing useful. Cecily had drifted in twice, looked at the columns, and drifted out again. Mr. Holt had called on the 6th day and been told by Marin that the Duke was engaged with estate matters and would be unable to receive him. She had smiled pleasantly when she said it. Mr. Holt had smiled back, and the quality of his smile was the quality of a man tightening a grip. What she found in the accounts over the next 10 days was this: a systematic siphoning conducted through false entries, dummy suppliers, and the quarterly Rowe and Sons transfer of a sum that had taken her 3 evenings to total, and then had to total again because she had not believed herself. The number was not the largest number she had encountered in her life. It was the most precisely organized. Each year slightly more than the last. Each increase calibrated to remain below the threshold that would require explanation. The whole architecture timed to conclude in one large final transfer. A transfer that, she noted with the flat calm of someone who has been doing this long enough to stop being surprised, was contingent on the completion of a large settlement. The kind that accompanied a betrothal between a wealthy duke and an Ashby daughter. She showed this to the Duke on the 9th evening, laying the totaled columns before him with the invoice she had found tucked behind the back cover of the 4th-year ledger, the one that showed the payment schedule in Holt's own small, precise hand. He looked at it for a long time without speaking. His left hand was flat on the table, a working hand, she had noticed, with a small scar at the base of the thumb, from something he had not explained and she had not asked about. This is the document. One of them. The others are in the accounts, once you know what you're reading. She set her pen down. He is careful. But he is vain about his method. Careful people often are. He looked at her then, and the look was the kind she had not, in 26 years of careful invisibility, been looked at with. The look of someone finding exactly what they had been trying, without knowing quite how to look for it, to find. She held it steadily. She had decided, somewhere in the last 9 days, to stop performing invisibility with this particular person. She was not entirely certain when the decision had been made, but she suspected it had been the 7th evening, when he had caught her totaling a column in her head, and had waited, without prompting, for her to finish. The tribunal will need more than papers. It will need Holt's own books, the ones he keeps at home, which he will not surrender. No, but his assistant might. His assistant, a young man named Banks, who has been with Holt for 2 years, and who presented, last autumn, at the bank where the Rowe account is held, asking questions about the disposition of the account that Holt had not authorized. He said this carefully. I believe Mr. Banks has been asking himself certain questions for some time. Outside, the August heat was still, and the garden was dark, and the only light in the room was the 2 candles at the near end of the table, which had put them at some point through the working evenings in a reliable proximity that neither of them had addressed, and that her mother had addressed several times with diminishing effect. The house was quiet. Her mother had given up at 10 and gone to bed. If we have Banks and the invoice and the totaled accounts, we have everything but a witness and a venue. My father's solicitor is honest. He has been unhappy with this arrangement for 2 years. I can see it every time he is in the same room as Holt. She paused. He would chair it. And the venue? She thought about the entrance hall of Caldwell House. 43 people. The particular carrying quality of its vaulted ceiling, how a voice, correctly placed, could reach every person in it without being raised at all. You have a house here. I imagine the entrance hall is not small. He was quiet for a moment, with the focused quality of a man mapping something in his mind. The settlement papers were to be signed next Saturday. My solicitor can delay the date with procedural questions. 10 days. He looked at her. Can you hold Holt off for 10 days? I have been holding Holt off for 18 months. 10 days is nothing. And then, because the question had been sitting between them since the window recess at the betrothal gathering, and she had decided to be done with performing invisibility, what happens to Cecily after? He was very still. After? When the arrangement is dissolved. My father's name will be attached to this, however innocently. She kept her voice even. Cecily has done nothing wrong. She is decorative and self-interested, and she has always been kind to dogs and small children, and she is going to need someone to tell her this is not her fault. Something changed in his face that she could not entirely read, or rather, she could read it, but she set the reading carefully to one side to be examined later. Because now was not the moment. Your sister will not suffer for this. I will ensure it. He paused. And your hands. She looked down at the gloves, which she had been wearing at the table for 10 evenings, which had ceased bothering her somewhere around the 4th because she had had other things to be bothered by. My hands. When this is settled, you will tell me what is in the gloves. When this is settled, I will take them off. She left him at 11:30 with the invoice in her keeping, and a plan between them and the particular steadiness of someone who has been afraid of the wrong thing for a very long time and has only just noticed. What she had been afraid of, she thought, walking the upstairs corridor in the dark, was being seen. What she had not understood was that being seen by the right person was the only thing that ended the fear. On the 14th morning before the new signing date, a Tuesday, windless and bright in the way of late summer mornings that do not know they are the last of the season, Mr. Holt arrived at the house without appointment. Marin answered the door herself, which she had been doing for a week, because she had known this was coming and she preferred to meet approaching things. He was as immaculate as ever, in his gray coat and his gray expression, and he brought with him a quality of careful patience that she recognized as the posture of a man who has never had to force anything, because he has always found the right place to apply the right pressure. He smiled at her pleasantly. Miss Ashby, I wonder if we might speak privately. My father is in the study. I will have him called. I meant just the two of us. She looked at him. In 6 years of observing Mr. Holt, she had learned that his most dangerous moments were his quietest ones, and this was among the quietest she had encountered. She let none of this appear in her face. My father's study. I will join you there. She sent the housemaid up before she entered. She did not sit. Holt sat, having been invited to by her father, who had looked between them with the apprehension of a man who could feel the weather but could not read the sky. I have been looking at the household accounts. He let this sit. I notice that a set of the files from the 4th year are not in their usual place. I moved them. I have been reviewing them. Have you? Is there a particular concern that prompted you? The Rowan Sons disbursements. I have been trying to locate the supplier records. Silence. Her father shifted in his chair. Holt's smile stayed precisely where he had put it, which was, she thought, The most sophisticated thing about him, the ability to leave an expression exactly in place while everything behind it was doing something else entirely. Rowe & Sons is a consultancy I have used for some years. I should have made this clearer in the account notes. I apologize for the confusion. Of course, I will make a note of it. Could you give me their address? I would like to write to them about last quarter's figure, which appears to have been charged twice. It was a lie. She had not found a double charge. She was testing the architecture to see where it creaked. I will have the information sent to you. I would not want to burden you with correspondence. The smile acquired, at last, the very faintest asymmetry, one corner 2 degrees higher than the other, the expression of a man recalibrating. I came also to mention that the Duke's solicitor has raised procedural objections to the signing schedule. This is not unusual. But I want to assure your father that these matters are best handled by those who understand the complexity, and that any delay, he paused, with the delicacy of a man pressing precisely the right keys, prolongs the uncertainty for Miss Cecily, which is of course the concern dearest to everyone's hearts. He looked at her when he said it, not at her father, at her. That is very thoughtful of you. We will manage the uncertainty. He left. Her father sat in his chair for a long moment after, and then said, in the voice of a man who has been comfortable for 6 years being confused, "What was that about, really?" He was checking how much I know. And how much do you know? She picked up the 4th-year accounts from the side table and laid them open to the page she had marked, rather a lot. And she let him read. The next 6 days were the kind of quiet that precedes things. Holt called twice more. She was not available either time. She had written a note once by messenger to a house in the city, and a reply had come back in a careful, brief hand that told her Banks had agreed. She had written a second note to the Duke, and he had replied in person at the back garden gate at 8 in the evening, which was not how they had agreed to meet, but was, apparently, where things had arrived. He knows. He has always known something. He is wondering now how much we have. He looked at the gate, at the garden, at the amber light of the kitchen windows across the grass. Banks will come. Banks will come. And I have the original invoice and the totaled columns and 3 years of cross-referenced entries. What I don't have is the bank correspondence. I have the bank correspondence. 2 letters in Holt's hand, directing specific transfers on specific dates. I have had them since spring. A pause. I did not know, when I came here, that the family in question would be yours. You came here to catch him. I came here because Holt's destination led here, and I intended to find what he had done and see it properly closed. He was looking at the kitchen light, which moved slightly as someone inside passed by. I had not anticipated. He stopped. Anticipated what? He looked at her. In the dimness his face was very clear, the grief and the steadiness of it, the particular set of a man who has learned to conduct himself with honor at cost, and has done this for so long that the cost has become invisible even to him, like an old scar he no longer feels, but that has shaped every motion above it. Someone keeping the same hours as me. He said it simply. Over the accounts, someone who reads columns of figures the way other people read. He paused. I do not know what other people read for pleasure. Novels. They read novels. Yes, perhaps I will read one. Afterward, she looked at him for a long moment. There was a thing between them that had been building through all the candle-burned evenings, through the question about her hands and the first exhale that had been more than a laugh, through the note about Banks and the garden gate and this particular evening, and she had named it to herself several days ago, and the name she had given it was not available to her to speak yet, because there were still 6 days on the clock, and the speaking of it would tangle the accounting, and she was. At heart, always and first, a person who balanced the columns before she looked at the total. 6 days. 6 days. And he left, back through the gate, into the lane, and she watched him go, and then went inside and checked that the invoice was still in the book where she had put it, and then went to bed and did not sleep for some time. Cecily found her at breakfast on the 8th day, which was not where Cecily usually was at breakfast, and Cecily sat down across the table with the unusual stillness of someone who has decided to say something and is not certain how to begin. Is something wrong? With the betrothal. Marin set down her cup. What makes you ask? Because Holt came again yesterday. Cecily looked at the window, and because the Duke's solicitor has delayed twice, and because Father has stopped telling me not to worry. She paused. Father only stops telling me not to worry when he is worried. She was more observant than she had been given credit for. Marin made a note of this for later. There are some details that need to be clarified. Nothing that concerns you directly. Cecily looked at her. She had their mother's dark eyes and something that was not quite their mother's shallowness, but was not yet its alternative, something that might grow, in the right conditions, into intelligence. He looks at you. The Duke. He looks at you, not me. Marin said nothing. I don't think I mind. She looked at the window again. I think I would like to marry someone who looks at me, not around me. A pause. I think I would rather wait. Marin looked at her sister for a moment with the particular tenderness that had nowhere to go in their family, that was always surplus to requirements, and she said, I think, when this is done, that will be possible. Cecily nodded once, very small, and picked up her own cup, and they finished breakfast in a silence that had, for the first time Marin could remember, the quality of company. The morning of the Saturday arrived overcast and then cleared by 9, and by 10:30 the entrance hall of Caldwell House had been arranged, by a process Marin had helped orchestrate from behind the scenes, to contain the following: the Duke's solicitor and the family's solicitor at the central table, Lord Ashby. Pale and holding himself very still, Cecily on a chair to the left, with the housemaid, a magistrate named Chorus, who had been in practice for 30 years and who had the demeanor of a man who had seen every variety of human ingenuity applied to dishonesty, and was therefore not easily surprised. Mr. Banks sitting near the window in the clothing of a man who had dressed for something important, and was still not sure he was doing the right thing, but had come anyway, and Mr. Holt, who had been invited by Lord Ashby for a meeting to discuss the procedural delays, and who had walked into the hall with his usual composure, and had seen the configuration, and had gone very still in the doorway for a count of 3 before continuing forward, because he was, above all things, a man who did not show his hand before he had to. Marin stood at the side of the room. The Duke stood near the table. He had not looked at her since she came in. They had agreed on this. Their association was not the point, and pointing at it would give Holt something to pull on. Good morning, said the Duke, to Holt, and his voice was entirely even. Thank you for coming. I was not told that we would have such company. We needed witnesses. For the accounting, Holt looked at Mr. Chorus, at the solicitors, at Banks, who was looking at the floor. What accounting? The Duke put on the table a set of pages, face down. I have here the household accounts for the Ashby estate, years 1 through 5 of your tenure, cross-referenced with a set of originals kept by Mr. Holt's predecessor. He did not turn the pages over yet. I have also here the bank correspondence for the Rowe and Sons account, held at the private bank in the city. He placed a second document beside the first, still face down, and I have here an invoice, in your hand, setting out a payment schedule tied to the completion of a settlement between my family and the Ashby family. He placed the invoice on top. He did not turn any of it over. The room was very quiet. The August light came through the hall windows and lay on the floor in long, clear rectangles, perfectly still. I wonder whether you could tell me what you know about the Rowe and Sons account. Banks looked up. He was young, perhaps 23, with the residual pallor of someone who has been living with a secret and not sleeping well. He looked at Holt. He looked at the floor. I know that it is not a consultancy. He swallowed. Because I wrote to them. Last October, Mr. Holt asked me to file the quarterly transfer, and I had a question about the account description, and I wrote to the address on file, and the letter came back undelivered. The address does not exist. Holt's chin lifted, very slightly. The motion of a man making a private decision. He looked at Banks with the expression of a man who had, somewhere in the recent past, estimated the probability of this moment and had arrived at the wrong figure. Banks has misunderstood, Magistrate Corris, the Duke said, and Corris looked up from his notes. I would now like to read from the bank correspondence. He turned the letters over. He read the first one. It was in Holt's hand, precise and small, directing the transfer of a specific sum from the Ashby household account on a specific date to account number Rowe, final balance to be settled upon completion of the betrothal settlement. He read the second one. It directed the final sum. It was dated 3 days before the signing that had not yet taken place. The numbers matched the invoice. The invoice matched the cross-referenced accounts. The whole architecture stood, revealed the way false columns always stand, revealed when the actual numbers are laid beside them, by perfect, damning agreement. Holt said nothing for a long moment. The light on the floor did not move. Somewhere outside, a bird resumed an aria it had perhaps begun that morning. I believe that there has been a misunderstanding of the account's purpose. Then you will be able to explain it at considerable length to the relevant authorities. He made a note. I will need the name of your bank agent. What happened next happened slowly. Holt sat down, which was the first uncontrolled thing she had ever seen him do. The solicitors conferred in low voices. Lord Ashby put his face in his hands briefly and then straightened, with the look of a man facing a bill he cannot dispute. Banks let out a long breath and looked at the window. Marin had been watching Holt. She had been watching the moment. She had been braced for it, armed for it, and when it came, it was not what she had expected. What she saw in his face, in the instant before he reassembled it, was not the calculation she had been tracking for months. It was something older and smaller and genuinely sad, the expression of a man who had once wanted something he could not have, and had decided to make the wanting someone else's cost, and had spent so long in the service of that decision that he had forgotten there had ever been a choice. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds. Then it was gone, and he was Holt again, contained and careful, and she pitied him more than she had feared him, which was exactly how it ought to go. Mr. Holt, he looked at her, and she had not intended to speak, but she spoke. You will be given, I imagine, an opportunity to make what you can right. I would take it. She paused. The families who are harmed are small. They have not the resources for a long proceeding. A full restitution made promptly, with a complete accounting, would likely end the matter before it became a matter for wider attention. He looked at her for a long moment with the expression of a man reading a thing he had not expected to find. You are very generous for someone I have. He stopped. He did not finish the sentence. He looked instead at his own hands. I will need to speak with my own counsel. That is an entirely reasonable thing to want. He was escorted from the hall, not unkindly, by the magistrate's clerk, and the doors closed behind them, and the room that remained was smaller and quieter than it had been, and full of the particular stillness that follows the end of a long engine. Lord Ashby looked at his own hands, then at the ceiling, then at the Duke, and said, "I had no part in this. I want that understood." "It is understood, and will be stated." He paused. "The accounts will require an independent review. Your solicitor can recommend someone." Yes, he sounded tired. Cecily had not moved from her chair. She was looking at Marin, not at the space where Holt had been, and her expression was not relief exactly, but the cousin of it, the look of a young woman revising something. The solicitors remained to finalize procedural notes. Banks remained and was spoken to, gently, about what came next, which did not include any consequence to Banks, who had, in the end, come when asked and told the truth when asked that too. He was given a brief account of his position by the Duke's solicitor and left looking, if not entirely well, at least less pale. Then the room cleared, in stages, the way rooms do, and at the end of it Marin was at the window, and the Duke was at the table, and they were alone in the entrance hall of Caldwell House, with the light still lying on the floor and the bird still busy outside with its ambitious mourning. She turned around. He was looking at her. The gravity was still there, the steadiness, but there was something else under it now. The look of a thing that has been holding itself back from moving for a very long time and has been given, at last, a reason not to hold. She pulled off the left glove first, then the right. She set them on the windowsill. The scars were clean, long past danger, old enough to be silver-edged in places. The whole of her left hand and the back of her right, afire, 4 winters ago, when the kitchen chimney of the old house had failed and she had gone back in for the household papers because they were what was left. Her mother had been mortified by the utility of it. She had not, herself, been mortified. She had retrieved the papers. He crossed the room. He did not look at her face first, because he understood the question, which was not about the face. He looked at her hands, and then he took them, both of them, very carefully in both of his, and he held them in the light from the window, and he looked at them for a long moment with the expression of a man reading something important, and slowly and precisely. It was the expression of a man who had finished his accounting and found, at last, what he had been looking for in the sums. The household papers. He had guessed. She had known he would. Most of them. I dropped the last folder on the way out. He held her hands a moment longer. His own were very warm, and the small scar at the base of his thumb was exactly where she had noted it, for all the evenings she had noted it. "I have something to say to you. I know. The estates are settled, and the accounts are closed, and Cecily will not suffer, and your father will have what he requires. None of that is pending." He looked at her. "So I am going to say what I am saying entirely without the other business attached to it, which I want you to understand. I understand. Marry me because you want to. Not because it is convenient, or because the evening has been dramatic, or because I have rendered some service. It is the only reason I will take, and I will wait as long as the answer requires." She looked at him for a moment, at the steadiness of him, at the face of a man who had said something true and was prepared for any consequence. "I know what I want. I have known it for approximately 9 days, and I have been ignoring it on account of the accounting. And now the accounting is finished. The bird outside offered its opinion on the subject, briefly and without ambiguity. He smiled, the full version of the expression that had been building through all the evenings. and it transformed his face into something she recognized, suddenly, as the thing grief had been keeping covered, as the thing that had been there all along behind the armor, waiting with the same patience she had been waiting with, in the same quiet discipline she knew by its proper name, which was hope. The wedding was 4 months later, in October, in the chapel at the edge of the Caldwell estate, on a morning of blue cold air and the last red leaves. It was attended by the family solicitor, who approved of the match on practical grounds, by the housemaid, who wept so thoroughly that she had to be given the Duke's handkerchief and was allowed to keep it, by Cecily, who wore a gown the color of winter roses and who had, in the 4 months between, made the acquaintance of a quiet younger son with a gift for carpentry, who looked at her directly and with no apparent agenda, and who was already a different creature for it, and by Lord Ashby, who had sat through an independent accounting and a period of considerable discomfort, and had emerged from it slightly less comfortable and considerably more honest, which was, Maren thought, the best result available. Mr. Holt had, as she had suggested, made a full restitution. It had been accepted. He had removed himself to the continent, which was where men in his position removed themselves, and was understood to be in some variety of reduced circumstance, and to have recently taken up watercolors, which struck her, when she heard it, as exactly the occupation of a man trying to see the world differently, and not yet certain he could. Banks found a position with a different firm, and proved to be, in the absence of Holt's supervision, a conscientious and accurate young man, with a genuine gift for the detection of error in other people's columns, which he had apparently always had. The housemaid, in whose presence Maren had made most of the important decisions of those 2 weeks, was given a household position of greater responsibility, commensurate with the responsibilities she had already been quietly taking on for years. She found this appropriate and said so, bluntly, in the direct way of someone who had always called the accounting what it was. Cecily was married the following June to the younger son with the carpentry, in a ceremony somewhat larger than Maren's own, and in the spring of that year, driving up the long approach to what was now her house with the light coming off the parkland the way light comes off parkland in late April, gold, and long and gentle. Maren heard the door open and saw the housekeeper step out with her usual efficiency, and heard behind her a dog that was very enthusiastic about the carriage, and felt, settling into her like a season rather than an event, the specific warmth of having arrived at something she had not known to name. She would always remember the entrance hall at Caldwell House, later, not the reckoning, or not only that, but the window, and the drive below, and the moment a man she had been watching for 20 minutes had crossed the room and asked her, without preamble, why she was watching the person she was watching. She had not answered, that night. She had told him, instead, that she was deciding. She had not mentioned that she had, by then, already decided. She had only been composing how to begin. He was waiting at the door when she stepped out of the carriage. He had the look of a man who had been working and had come out without the coat, with the work-shed smell on him that she had by now learned to read as its own species of contentment. He offered his hand, the one with the scar, and she took it with the one with the old silver edge. And they stood in the late April light, with the dog completing 3 circuits of the drive, in its expression of general satisfaction. Good journey? Long. Worth it. He looked at her with the look that had replaced the grief, or built its house beside it, the look of a man who had come to understand that the best ledgers are kept in common. Come inside. There is tea. She followed him in, past the dog, through the door, into the warm and particular light of home. If this story sat with you, if you felt, in those quiet 10 evenings over the accounts, how much courage it takes to be seen by exactly the right person, then you know the kind of stories we tell here, at this fire, at this hour. Pull your chair a little closer. there is always a chair kept. The kettle has not gone cold. I would love to know, when did you know in this story that Marin had already made her choice? Was it the garden gate, or the window at the betrothal, or the moment she set her pen down and waited for him to read the total? Leave the moment in the comments, because that is where the best conversations live. If you want to stay by this fire for the next story, the chair beside you is kept, and the subscription button keeps it. Sleep well tonight. And be generous, when you can, with the ones who kept their hands in their pockets and came anyway.